Hello everyone, I am Dr. Eric Morrison. This is 7 Under 3, and I'll be covering trading education using the TC2000 and TradingView platforms. Hello, this is the FOREX Week in Review for the 28 majors and minors and 6 exotics. And I just wanted to kind of cover the effect of a NVIDIA reversal of the entire markets globally. It affected all of the positioning and invalidated the COT, or the commitment of traders tables here. And what we saw was incredible fluctuations in overall price against the picks that we had normally had set up for this week. To make a long story short, we basically lost with the drawdown this week, and over a one lot was a loss of $671, and over recommended lot size was a loss of $3,243. So drawdowns happen, but it's also a great learning opportunity in order to make sure that you account for these kind of fluctuations in the markets. When a specific reversal happens, it needs to be noted, because the COT is submitted on Tuesday to the government or the CFTC to be published on Friday. So anything happens after Tuesday in terms of positioning can adversely affect the overall COT for the next week. So what we need to do is be vigilant as far as overall market reversals and fade the process. The important thing here is that when we have these drawdown events is that we make note of it, learn from it, and move on, and stay disciplined to your process with risk management as your number one priority. I say at every video, ruthless risk management, and it is the number one priority to trading and fading in this environment. It allows you to fade another day. So we start off with Aussie dollar, Canadian dollar. That was one of the picks for the Sunday Monday fade, and as you can see, it was down with the distribution. But look at all of this chop in the consolidation zone here. And so with that in line here, we look at next week's overall commitment of traders. And what we see here when we don't have a setup that is to our advantage is that we see some 50-50 on the border of longs versus shorts. Now what we need to look at is, okay, what is contributing to this consolidation zone that's highlighted here? Well, the traders are not committed to one direction or the other, and this could fluctuate regardless of what on the cross pair happens. But these pretty high percentages here, we need to make sure that we have both the base pair and the quote pair in favor of maximum probabilities. So that was a loss. Aussie dollar Swiss franc was also another loss, and as you can see here on Monday, we had a loss here of $132. So 531 overall based on positioning. But you can see here we don't, for this week, we don't have an overall advantage. Both the base and the quote commercials are both long in this sense. So in trying to see where the advantage is when you get to the cross pair, it's mixed. It's purple. So we highlight that as purple. We didn't have Aussie dollar, Japanese yen, but same thing. We have an imbalance here to one side, which shows a mixed cross pair. So this wasn't traded. Aussie dollar, New Zealand dollar was not traded based on last week's, but for this week, what do we see? We see some pretty clean crowding on opposite pairs of the base and the quote. So here you mainly see green, here you mainly see red. Commercials 63% on the quote, base 77%, and we got a nice lead in for next week for a long. And what we have here on the weekly, we have long, and on the daily we also have long, with a lot of room to the upside. Aussie dollar, US dollar was a pick last week. Same thing, Monday, overall sell-off. Daily we have a nice overall move to the upside, but on the weekly we have this distribution where volume and all that was to the short side. So, or selling, lots of selling happening on the weekly. So this is not in our favor for next week, so I'm not going to pick it. Even though the cross pair here was pretty clean, commercials hedging. We have US dollar above their 6-month average. So with this hedge, there could be a potential for more price action to the downside. And as we can see here, the overall environment was pretty weak on the weekly. Now Canadian dollar, Swiss franc, was an overall gain to the downside as an overall short, and we had a nice small gain here, $78 plus number of lot size was 313 to the downside. So we, as you can see here, we do have an overall quote. We do have a Canadian dollar base. What I looked at here specifically was that the weekly and the daily, this overall failed spring. It should be green candle, but it's overall failed, and this is also down to the downside, so we could have a nice move to the downside for next week. So this is one of the selects for next week. Canadian dollar, Japanese yen, same thing. However, I didn't pick it because of the fact that it has accumulation on the daily. More price action to the upside. Very strong at this point, so it could reverse and go right back up. I could be wrong. This is pretty good to the downside overall weekly, but I want overall probabilities in my favor. Swiss franc, Japanese yen, same thing. Next to overall. Swiss franc, South African rand. Now this is an exotic. So as far as priorities go, one thing that you need to consider here is these overall movements. What you see here is a lot of chop after Monday. We did have a small gain, $68 overall, $273 in profit. So we need to make sure that when we have these overall fades that all the probabilities are in our favor. Now Swiss franc, South African rand is very clean on the crossbear, clean on the base. Commercials at least 60% here on the South African rand. So we do have a problem here with an upthrust and a down candle on this, but what I would do in order to maximize risk management here is you have moved to the long side depending on the open, and it all depends on the open. If this moves well below this overall daily low, then it's all negated. If it's back up above the high, you're a go. But just go ahead and make sure that you have your stop here at the low of this daily candle to minimize risk. Good to go, but this is kind of a wick trade or a wick fade, and you make sure that you have your probabilities in favor going forward. So you might want to use a lesser lot size with this or tighten your stops. Either ones are good risk management approaches for fade. Next we have the Euro Aussie dollar. Now this was a pick last week, and as you can see overall on this short was an overall loss. And if you have your stop here at the high, it goes to what I was talking about with the Swiss franc, you had an overall stop, and then it just shot up with an accumulation spring Wyckoff to the upside. So this is again relatively clean for Sunday. However, we do have a weekly accumulation which shows a lot of potential to the upside. So I took this one off the list for next week. Euro Canadian dollar, all of these are orange where they're hedging. Didn't pick them. It's a good thing I didn't because it continued to move to the upside. Same thing with Euro Swiss franc. Didn't pick it. Euro British pound also. Whenever the commercials start hedging, and this is the reason why this isn't red, it's orange, is that on these shorts, commercials are above their 6-month average, meaning they're hedging. And what we see, we saw price moving to the upside. Euro Japanese yen was another. I didn't pick it, but as you can see for this one, we have a COT index that is contrary to, without the small speculators, is contrary to the overall move. We did see last week or the previous week to move to the upside, and then afterwards it continued to move to the upside. Here in New Zealand was orange, also with a move to the upside, and as you can see, when they start hedging, this could have this potential move to the upside. Same with Euro US dollar, also moved to the upside with accumulation on Monday. Also had a weekly accumulation, and see how that affects overall movement and momentum to the upside. Euro South African rand, also movement to the upside, was not a pick. British pound, Aussie dollar was not a pick for last week, but we did see overall price action come back down to the downside. We have an overall clean base and quote, very high percentages on commercials on both the base and quote, and high on the crossbear. Overall lead to the downside with a nice stop here at the high on the daily. Potential short for Sunday, Monday. British pound, Canadian dollar, didn't pick that last week. Just movement to the upside. What you saw was this overall weekly candle. Same with British pound, Aussie dollar. I failed to mention that. British pound, Swiss franc. Now we have probably the cleanest here of overall base and quotes. And then looking at this, went ahead and hit a Z3 excursion with an overall shooting star here. So as far as overall setups, I normally don't pick a previous weekly move, but this weekly move is almost a doji, and so I'm going to go ahead with this clean pick, and you'll understand my rationale when I go over New Zealand Swiss franc and New Zealand Japanese yen from last week. This will be an overall short with stop at the overall high. British pound Japanese yen, same thing. Very high percentages on the Japanese yen. I'm a little concerned because of the overall movement, but if you look at small speculators, they're 50-50. So that's why this kind of purple here. There's not a lot of commitment here on the small speculators. However, when looking at the weekly, we have a down overall candle, and we can also do a potential wick trade to the downside. So I have the British pound Japanese yen, even though the daily is not in sync with the weekly, but we got overall price action to the downside. British pound, New Zealand dollar, nothing but red, no actual advantage at this point. Even though the COT says to the downside, look at the overall accumulation spring on the weekly to the upside. So this thing just rocketed it up and continue to rocket up. Now we do have a little bit of weakness on last Friday. However, this doesn't show me any kind of advantage whatsoever when they're so close in weakness to each other. Same with British pound, US dollar, same thing, weakness across the board. We do have a weekly, and we do have a potential for a nice short here with the RL270 here on the daily. If you want to go ahead and take that wick trade, that may be a potential, but there's overall strength reversing back to the upside, and it is on a consolidation zone on the weekly. In order for this to move, we do have to look at individual currencies together, and US dollar, though it is hedging to the upside, is basically moving down. So if this continues to move down, this pair will actually move up. Same thing with British pound, South African rand. There are, however, two down off a weekly Z3 and Z3 excursion. Both of them are down. Interesting overall dynamic for British pound. If you want to go ahead and do a wick trade on that, that might be one, but I don't normally like red across the board. This has an overall momentum to the downside. Nice overall momentum for British pound, South African rand. New Zealand Canadian dollar, same thing. Also note Canadian dollar 50-50 on the commercials. Down overall on the weekly after a failed spring, and the daily failed up thrust. So I'm not going to go ahead and go for that. No real advantage. Now this is what I'm talking about, the overall move to the downside on New Zealand Swiss franc, which is an overall pick for this week too as well. Had a very clean base and quote. No green or red on opposite one. So what happened was it was an overall move to the upside here with an actual wick. Would have been a nice overall short for a Sunday Monday fade with this much risk to the downside. Didn't take it, but I thought overall momentum was to the overall upside, back up to the Z3, and I didn't take it. This is an overall low risk wick trade that I would do for next time, knowing that I have this kind of clean. And this is for this week. So same thing, overall weekly to the downside. Nice overall momentum with the FTM to the downside. Nice wick trade to the downside, and we'll see. We do have the 200 here and a failed up thrust. Overall pick for next week. Same with New Zealand Japanese yen. Overall wick trade right up against the Z3. Would have been a good overall pick for the downside too as well. Both of them were clean, especially with the Japanese yen that was all green to this side. But now that you got 50-50 here on small speculators, it's still a good overall short to the downside on Japanese yen. We have major momentum with an FTM to the downside. Again, good up thrust right up against the RL270. Nice resistance overall. Nice wick trade for, or if you want to move the stop up here to the Heikinashi, that's also a good risk to reward. Zealand US dollar is now red. We have major movement to the downside, also red overall. US dollar has to gain in strength. If it continues to fall though, however, that's why I did not pick it, and the overall bump to the upside. US dollar, Canadian dollar is now mixed. No all advantage. We also have more shorts on the commercial side with an accumulation to the upside on volume. No advantage on US dollar, Canadian dollar. US dollar, Swiss franc is now max selling positioning. We also have a failed spring here up against the RL270 up here. This could be a very good short opportunity with this shooting star here. Overall stop here with a nice potential back down to the RL270. Good overall. This continues to weaken, and this is strength. This will definitely move to the downside. US dollar, Japanese yen, I did not pick this one. Overall, shows overall strength here, back to the upside. Even though this week it does show some pretty good statistics above the 70% for the commercials. If you want to go ahead and do an overall wick trade, but I didn't pick it overall probabilities because of the strength. US dollar, Mexican peso, I did pick for last week. Very weak. US dollar was strong. And on this long, what did I have? An overall loss of $128. Overall loss with lot size 514. US dollar, South African rand is now mixed. No real advantage. Down and down. We do have commercials to the downside, but we also have large speculators to the downside too. So not a pick for next week. What we have here is South African rand, Japanese yen. We had distribution the previous week to the downside on Friday. An overall bump up on Monday. Loss a little over a scratch loss here, $36. So in doing this, make sure that you have ruthless risk management, and it seems to be showing a double W formation to the upside with accumulation here and a failed up thrust. That's interesting. Right up against the RL270 on the weekly. A lot of consolidation here for South African rand, Japanese yen, just now mixed. So going over the picks for next week, I have Aussie dollar, New Zealand dollar, pretty clean. Canadian dollar, Swiss franc here is also pretty clean. Swiss franc, South African rand, nice wick trade. British pound, Aussie dollar, nice overall trade, low risk. British pound, Swiss franc, very clean. Very clean, overall wick trade. British pound, Japanese yen, also another nice wick trade. Zealand Swiss franc, very clean, another wick trade. Zealand Japanese yen, and US dollar Swiss franc. Failed spring, nice overall wick trade to the downside. Everything is contingent upon the open on Sunday. Any gaps above the previous day's highs or lows, highs for shorts, any gaps below the lows of the previous day for longs, negates this overall fade. Hope this was helpful in understanding an overall drawdown week. If you're interested in these kind of strategies going forward, programming in both Python and PineScript, and auto trading, and if you want to be a part of the Commitment to Traders community on Crowded Market Report, click on the links below. And remember, and always remember, ruthless risk management as a priority for everything when you're trading or fading. And I'll see you on Sunday. Well, if you like this video, hit the like rumble button below and the subscribe button. And if you want more information, click the course information links below. On the TradingView link and on TC2000, I have an affiliate link. If you open up a TC2000 account, you will receive a $25 discount using that link. Thank you for your time.